Buenos dias. ¿Cómo estás? ¿Cómo están? How are you personally, and how are you as a class? Speaking a little bit of pidgin Spanish, so to speak, I started learning Spanish in my 30s when I started going to Mexico, and I'm really eager to practice it. Me gusta practicar mi español. I like to practice my español, my Spanish, and I'm looking forward to doing that in Costa Rica. And I'm thinking about how you, as a student, have been at an institution now, how you've been in an institution, ESU, for 3 and in some cases 4 years, most of you. You know ESU as an organization pretty well. You know how to navigate financial aid. You know how to navigate your food choices here at ESU. You have relationships with your professors. You have a lot of things that are embedded in your daily habits that are requiring you to know about the organization of ESU. And so that is our entry point to studying today's chapter, chapter 3. We're taking on organizational analysis. It's a totally different perspective than our last perspective, the Marxist perspective. Now we're taking on a very different and more practical direction in the way that we're going to look at media content. We're going to look at media content as a function of being produced by an organization. So we have to look at the organization to understand how the content is produced. We're going to seek to understand in this video lecture and also in our chapter why media organizations produce the content that they do. We're going to take a look at the structure and the process and conventions of organizations. Conventions are habits or ways of doing things that are considered to be routine. Just like when you come to ESU, you have your parking lots that you know that you can go to and ones that are off limits unless you want to possibly get a ticket. So organizations have a big impact on the media messages, and in order to get those organizations, you've got to look at the structure, how they're set up, we've got to look at the process of their communication, how it takes place, and we've got to look at their conventions. This material is based on theory, believe it or not. It's not all completely practical. It's called organizational theory. Organizational theory recognizes that, especially here in the United States, work is a central feature of life. Just think about how important work is. Many of our relationships are organized through the workplace. Many people who end up getting married or end up in partnerships, they meet at the workplace. Not all of those partnerships survive, but the workplace serves as a meeting place. The workplace also serves as a topic of discussion, even when we're not in the workplace. We leave work, we go home, we meet with others wherever we're living, and we talk about what we're doing at work. Now, that may not be so much the case with you while you're in school, but that certainly is the case for the average American when they enter the workplace. And also, the amount of time that Americans spend working is just astronomical. In the United States, it's really the only Western country that I know of, successful Western country, that has only 2 weeks, a paltry 2 weeks of vacation per year. Most of the rest of the world, and especially in Europe, where you have a guaranteed 4 to 5 weeks vacation per year, guaranteed by federal or state or local law, 5 weeks guaranteed every year. The United States pales in comparison. Most people have 2 weeks, and when you take that 2 weeks off, you're even taking work with you. You're on your phone, you're answering voicemail, you're answering email, you're answering texts from your boss. And so the American work ethic is embedded in the totality of our existence. Really, it's very much who we define, how we define who we are by our work. So with that as a backdrop, we look at work as a dimension of organizational analysis, because work is central, and the places where people work are very often organizations. And organizations are comprised of employees and employers. And different structures are also framed around that bilateral relationship with ownership groups and corporations and boards of directors and stockholders, and then underneath, I hesitate to use that word, I don't like the metaphor of it, but we're looking hierarchically. That's one thing that exists in organizations. You start to go downward, you have managers, and then you have workers, and then you have the people who are servicing, and then you have the people who are doing the manufacturing, and then the people who are doing the really, really hard manual labor extracting minerals from the ground in caves in Congo. So you have all kinds of layers that are present in organizations. What is an organization? It's a system, or it's an order of relationships that have coordinated activities that are directed towards a whole. That's what an organization is, and that implies that there are people involved in that. And so when we take a look at organizations in the media world, we have to become media critics that are adopting an organizational perspective. We still want to keep our eye on the media, but we have to be media critics, but at the same time, we're adopting this particular perspective. So we're going to look at, in our case, communication people, we're going to look at artifacts and events. Now, artifacts are human-made things. It could be a television show, a web page, a movie. It could be a brochure. That's a human-made thing. That's what an artifact is, and that's what we take a look at. That's what we'll be taking a look at in Costa Rica. We'll also be taking a look at events. When you have a premiere of a television show or a final episode, that is an event. When you have a sporting playoff game, that is an event. We can take a look at that. We can take a look at soccer, for example, as it's portrayed in media in Costa Rica, and examine soccer from an organizational standpoint by examining the team ownership. That's how organizational analysis takes place. Now, organizational analysis as a dimension of the communication field, that is, after all, what this course is media criticism, but it's in the Department of Communication. It involves taking a look at several communication behaviors. You can focus in on those in the book. I'm not going to go over those in a lot of detail here, but it's the idea that certain forms of communication take place in an organization. And since we're doing organizational analysis, we're going to take a look at those forms of communication. You've got performance. You've got how people expressively display themselves. You've got narratives. Those are stories that are told in the workplace. There's a story at ESU that if you're a student in a class, for example, and the professor's late, you only have to wait for 10 minutes if it's an instructor, and 15 minutes if it's a professor. That's just total myth, right? But it's a story that gets told, and it actually imparts a value and an implied behavior that students should follow according to the story. So you've got narratives also as another form of communication. You've got textual communication as another form. Those written documents that an organization has. You've got management communication, the communication that comes down from above in some cases, or if managers have more of a collaborative style, comes from more of a lateral direction from your managers. But you got managerial communication, and you've got technology, technological structures, and all the upgrades and 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0 and new ways that these pieces of equipment and plugging into our phone and our laptop are supposed to improve our lives. Do they? That's the question. That's the ongoing question that I have. Now, next up in this idea of looking at media from an organizational standpoint is we do look at characteristics of the conventions that are being involved. Conventions are norms. They are norms that govern the choices made by the employees for how people should behave and how media products should function. The normal ways of doing things. It's like in our society in the U.S., you walk up to the post office. If somebody's coming behind you, you step to the side anymore. It doesn't matter whether they're a male or a female, and you hold the door open for them. That is a convention, and then part of that convention is they say thank you to you as they walk through. That's a convention. That's a normal way of doing things. It's not written in law. It's just something that we do. And so we look at conventions in the way that organizations produce media content, and we look at motivated conventions where people are motivated to have a sense of belonging, to have a sense of community, to feel like when they go to that workplace that they are one of the many people there who all feel like you belong rather than feeling like an outsider or feeling alienated. That's one convention that we expect in the workplace. Another convention is the shared convention. This is what people share in and do not just at the workplace, but outside of the workplace at happy hour, Christmas parties, or gift exchanges, or participating in football pools. Shared experiences are also part of organizations. And then you have this naturalized convention, the naturalized convention, which is it's largely invisible. It's where employees follow these things, but they don't really realize that they're following these things. So it starts to seep into your conversation. You start to talk more about the Yankees than you ever did before, because the Yankees are what most of the people seem to be fans of at your workplace. And so it starts to seep in. You don't realize you're doing it. And the next thing you know, you're watching Yankees content on television. It's sneaking in there. It's a naturalized convention. And then you have resilient conventions. These are conventions that endure over time. There are conventions that, for no other reasons, are there because they're permanent, like the NBC Peacock. It was a symbol which everybody in this class knows, and it was introduced originally to demonstrate that embassy was committed to having color programming in a time where black and white programming was what mostly existed on TV. So they used the peacock. It still persists today. Is it still a relevant icon to be branded with the NBC empire? That's for you to decide, but it's a resilient characteristic of that organization. And lastly, you have directive organizations, and I'll let you read about that one in the chapter to keep you interested in that section. Next up, we have a particular set of organizational conventions that we want to make sure that we make mention of when we look at organizations that are delivering news. So we have a lot of that going on right now. We're going to watch some news in Costa Rica, that's for sure. We're going to see news presented both live we're going to be having contact with some important government officials and other also kinds of techno bureaucrats that are working in the Costa Rican government to promote tourism. But also we're going to watch some Costa Rican news down there, television, radio, or newspapers. We're going to make sure that we get a hold of that. These organizations are, by their very nature, supposed to be presenting information, and everybody knows that they're presenting information that's supposed to be informing us on how to proceed in our daily lives, versus fictional programming, which would be a sitcom or a drama or telenovela. If you know what that is, we'll certainly see that in Costa Rica. It's kind of a soap opera, not really, but we'll explain more about that later. Fictional programs we don't realize are necessarily sending as information to affect our behavior. We're mostly in it for the entertainment and the escape. But news programs we're accepting as informational, and we're basing our decisions such that we'll take a vote in an election based on that information. We'll judge whether it's safe to live in a certain neighborhood. We'll judge whether we want to support a policy that's being considered in government. So news organizations we have to look at specially. And we look at things like beats in a news organization. If you know what that is, the journalistic term of beat. It's that journalists cover beats. And if you have journalists covering a crime beat, it's necessitating that crime is going to be covered, right? So the beat in and of itself is a convention versus a medical beat, which would ensure that a medical story will be covered. We look at news agencies also. We look at the news agencies in terms of what a news organization is being supplied by, because news organizations are supplied by other agencies. And are those other agencies, are they finite? Are they varied? Are they from different countries? We look at that, and when we look at news organizations from an organizational perspective. We look at punditry. You can read about that, what punditry is. There's a lot of that in politics right now. After Super Tuesday last night, if you turn on any political channel, you see a lot of punditry. See if you know what that's about. We know about press releases, how press releases are used by organizations to serve themselves. You should read up on that. And so what are the consequences of these news conventions as we wrap up our third video lecture for the class? The consequences are that we do have a function that the media play from a critical perspective. This is what we're trying to do in this class, is come to some conclusions at the end of all of these perspectives on what the implications are for the way that we live our lives. That's what we're doing here. And so one of those implications is that we have gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are people who are opening the gate. They decide who flows through the gate and which direction the flow goes. These are the news editors. These are the reporters. They are the ones deciding what the story is going to be, and they're deciding it within the framework of the organization, which has set up the beat for the organization. So if you're a reporter and you've been given a beat, you take that beat no matter whether you want to or not. Excuse me, I'm dismissing something on my phone there. And it's all part of a gatekeeping function, because you don't know about news that's not reported. If a new park has been built in Costa Rica and it's not reported on the news, nobody knows about it because the gatekeeper hasn't opened up the gate and let that information through. However, if a tree has been destroyed by an element of acid rain that's floating over Costa Rica that's said to come from North America, that if that's covered, that's because it's let through the gate. So gatekeepers is one consequence of an organizational analysis of media. A second consequence is agenda setting. Agenda setting, or the agenda setting hypothesis, as you may recall it from Intro to Mass Media, is all about the idea that media don't tell us what to think, they tell us what to think about. And they do that because they present the agenda for us. If I was to ask you what are the top issues that are affecting ESU students, you might say, parking might be one, safety on campus might be another, financial aid might be another. I don't know. Is that because those are the top issues, or is that because these issues are what are talked about mostly by other people? Think about that. That's the same idea behind agenda setting. It's the idea that the media are telling us what we should be thinking about is education. What we should be thinking about is taxes. What we should be thinking about is threats from Iran. That's how the agenda gets developed. It's the media don't tell us what to think. The media tell us what to think about. That's a criticism of an organizational perspective from an organizational perspective when you look at media. And finally, you have the criticism or the consequence of homogenization. Homogenization, you know that word homo, it means same. So homogenization is the idea that because of the conventions that are involved in organizations have conventions, people follow them to feel like they belong, and lots of other psychological reasons discussed in the chapter. Because we have those conventions, it also minimizes risk taking, it minimizes adventure, it gets a lot of sameness. People don't want to take risks. I mean, do you see business people coming to work wearing hippie clothing, for example? Do you have a single male in the United States Senate who has long hair? You know what I'm saying? These are not rules, these are not laws, but what are the odds that you wouldn't have those two examples of human beings that I just mentioned? That's how strong homogenization can be. It's that pressure and willingness in some cases to conform to what everybody else is doing. It leads to not much adventure in the media content itself. That's a criticism of organizations when big organizations run media content. So there are some thoughts for you today that you surely will be applying in your discussion question. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy the reading. Have a great day. Adios, que tengo buen día. Have a great day.